Disconnect the battery for safety.
So today I'm replacing the oil pump for the MR2. It's been leaking for a bit. Put it up on jack stands and I'm gonna remove the tire so I can get to the oil drain plug. Put your tire into the car for extra safety. Catch can under there. And your drain plug on a 1985, so the drain plug's a 14mm. Alright, just let it drain. While that's draining, I'm gonna remove this plastic shroud. You might have it, you might not, but they're 10mm all around. When you replace the oil pump on here, it's a good idea to replace the timing belt, and you have to reseal the oil pan. So the first thing you want to take off are the 4 bolts for the water pump pulley. Once you take off the belts and you try to twist these, it'll just spin around. But you want to get a ratcheting wrench, so it's easier to get to those pulley bolts from the bottom of the car. All 4 of them are loose, and I'll take it off when I need to later. Alright, so next you want to take off the AC pulley here. You want to loosen this 14mm. Once you loosen the pulley down there, there's a 14mm up top. I'll show it to you guys on the other engine. And you want to get a few extensions, a swivel, and a 14mm. Get it on that bolt. So once you loosen that, this belt will just come off. Next is the alternator belt. Right, so you want to get a short 12mm and loosen this nut here. Or if you have a ratcheting wrench, it's a lot easier. Alright, so at this point you can just pull the alternator forward and the belt should loosen. Next is a crankshaft bolt. If you have an impact driver, try that. If not, we're gonna have to use this special tool. Sometimes they're a bit stubborn to get off, but I'm gonna try it. Came right off. If your crankshaft bolt is being a bit stubborn, you're gonna have to get this tool. You can buy it on Amazon, and it just bolts on there. Allows you to get a breaker bar on here and then a breaker bar on that nut, and that way you can put a lot of torque on it and loosen that up. You gotta get the pulley off. You want to get yourself a crankshaft pulley puller, about $15 at Harbor Freight. You just got to pick which one of these bolts fit in these holes. On the MR2, we got to rotate the crank so the 2 holes are horizontal so we can get to them. The beam here interferes with it, so we gotta turn it. The way we turn it is we put this bolt back on, wrench on, it's a 19mm, and just, you're gonna want to turn it. Alright, so another horizontal, and we can access the holes. Just go through the bolts in your kit and see which fit into your crank pulley. Make sure you take the center nut back off. Alright, for your tool you want to grab this and then thread the thicker bolt through it. Once it comes out, you put this part on there, so it'll push on that center. So now we line it up and we put our bolts in. Make sure the center one is lined up with your crank. Once those are on there, pretty good, you want to just run this one down. It's all the way out as far as I can get it. Now it's hitting the beam here, so I'm gonna take it off and then try to wiggle the rest off. Go. So now we got to remove the timing belt cover. So the way you remove the timing belt cover is it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10mm on this top section. The center one has about 1. There's 1 back here, 2, 3, and this bottom section it's got about 3. They're all 10mm. At this point you should have all this off, so it should be easy. So we also want to remove this pulley here so we can get to that bolt back there. For this timing belt cover behind the pulley, you probably want to use an open end wrench. It's the only thing that works. I tried everything else. Unless you want to take the compressor bracket off. Alright, there we go. Now we can take the timing belt off. Maybe I'll line up the timing marks and then take it off. I'll show you guys how to do that. Whether you're replacing the timing belt or not, before you loosen it, you want to line up the timing marks. There's a little mark here on the backing plate on both sides, and there's a mark on the cams, and you want to line those up. So you'll turn your crank pulley down there, turn it till these lines come back around and line up with the marks on the timing belt cover here. And you line up this with that, pretty close. I'm gonna turn it just a tiny bit more. Now the timing marks are lined up, we can remove the belt. Since I'm replacing the timing belt, I'm gonna go ahead and take the motor mount off. So I'm gonna have to put the jack underneath the oil pump with a piece of wood. I have a piece of wood with foam. Just a normal piece of wood would be fine. I've done it before. That'll keep it from falling. To remove the motor mount, you got 14mm here, 2 nuts under here, and then a 17mm on the side here. Get these 2 14mm from the bottom. Take this bolt all the way out. Alright, so now we can get the belt out through there. To loosen the timing belt, you get this nut here. You loosen it, and then you should be able to push this. Get yourself a crowbar. So you want to just push this down this way and then tighten this bolt so it keeps it away from the belt, and it'll loose that tension and you can remove it. Once it's loose enough, you can just pull it out. The timing belt will come off. And then if you're not replacing it, you can just let it hang while you take the oil pump out. But if you are, you can put the new one in. That timing belt could come out now. Whenever you get anything from O'Reilly's or AutoZone or any auto parts store, make sure you inspect it before you install it. Make sure there's no tears in it because it'll cause failure. So always double check that there's nothing wrong with it. And we'll pop the new belt loose in there so we can put the motor mount back on and we can get to the oil pump. And I'm gonna go ahead and put the 2 nuts at the bottom. You can go ahead and torque these 40, 50 foot-pounds. All right, when your motor mount's back on, you can take off the jack from the bottom of the engine. And as you can see, the oil pan is fine. A lot of people ask if it'll damage it, but it doesn't. We can finally start getting to the oil pump. You gotta get this sprocket out. Sometimes it comes off pretty easy. All right. You want to get this 19mm banjo bolt off. You can leave that hanging out. So at this point we can take all the 10mm off of the oil pan. Grab yourself a spatula or a screwdriver and try to get in between there so you can split it. Once you get the pan off, there's 4 10mm in here that hold on the strainer. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Take those off. If you're just redoing the seal on here on your oil pan, you have to do this. So you take the oil pan off, and then you got to take the strainer off, and then this baffle off, because you have to put sealant on this side and on this side. The ultra black works best for this, the Permatex ultra black. You clean all this up, both sides, and then you put silicone on here and on here, and then you just sandwich it together. So I'm gonna take off the pulley. It's just that bolt and then that spring there before I take the oil pump out. Once this one's loose, you can take out my hand. So the oil pump has 7 bolts. It'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's your 12mm. Now we probably want to wedge it with a crowbar in here and then try to wiggle it apart. There's a 10mm that holds a dipstick tube. Let's get rid of that. Should come out. It's on there pretty good. There it is. Again, make sure you inspect your part. So these parts with the sealing surfaces, you want to make sure there's no scratches along the sealing surface that will cause a leak. And also make sure it looks like your old one. Sometimes they give you the wrong one. You have to clean all the old sealant off of this. Use a spatula or a blade probably works best. I'm not going to record this, but you get the idea. Just clean the base. And then this, both sides of this. Once you get the big stuff off, you want to grab some Scotch-Brite and then go around and knock off all the little stuff. So do that to both. And we want to do the same thing with this face where the oil pump sits, and then the face where the oil pan sits. Go in here and clean it up with a blade or something, and then Scotch-Brite after. And I'm gonna use this ultra black. You could use it as a gasket dressing and a gasket. So I'm gonna use it as a dressing because it's kind of hard to keep this on there. And try to pop it on. Top, screw this on. Now if you're using it as a gasket dressing, you want to do a small bead, just enough to hold it, and you want to do it on both sides of the gasket. Make sure you clean your part. Sometimes they come with like packaging oil. Clean that off before you do this. Once you get a thin layer of that, put your gasket on there, and then put another thin layer on this side. So once you get your sealant on there, make sure this face is clean. And also, before you put this in, it's got some grooves here. Make sure you line them up with the grooves inside of the pump. If these teeth don't line up, just spin them. Make sure the seal doesn't roll. I was having trouble with it rolling. Just get a pick and go around it. So now we can put all the bolts back on. There's 5 that are the same size, and the 2 longer ones go up here. And then go ahead and torque these down to, I want to say 12 foot-pounds. On there for the oil strainer. So here's the tricky part. You gotta put the baffle in here and put the strainer in. So we'll let the strainer hold the baffle. So the strainer bolts get torqued down to 82 inch-pounds. And then we'll sandwich it all together. Put all the oil pan bolts on and torque those to 43 inch-pounds. Cover back on for the flywheel. I put the dipstick tube back on here and then the sprocket back on. Grab your pulley, your spring on there. So what you want to do is push the pulley this way, extend it, and then we'll lock it in place. We'll run the belt through and then release it, and that'll put tension. We'll run the belt through, and when we loosen this, the tensioner will snap back and tension that belt. The timing belt can go on. Make sure your timing marks are still aligned. If not, get a 14mm and then turn these to make sure they're lined up. Right, those are lined up pretty good. You can have someone hold it up here while you do the bottom, or put a clamp on here. If you lined up your timing marks, it should be fine. Just to make sure, put your bolt in and then give it 2 revolutions, and then it should line up. And don't forget your timing belt guide. You want to put the covers back on. You want to start from the bottom and then the middle one, then the top. Put your water pump pulley back on, and then the AC pulley back on, and then we'll put on the crankshaft. Get the crankshaft on there. Put your bolt back on. Alright, for torquing the crankshaft bolt, you're gonna need this tool. You wanna put it on here. Go ahead and snug these down. Alright, so I'm gonna torque the crankshaft bolt to 101 pounds. I got the breaker bar here. It'll hold itself against the car's frame, so I'm just gonna go ahead and torque it to 101. At this point, after torquing this, you just got to put on your compressor belt and your alternator belt and just throw your wheel back on, and you should be good.
Before you add the 3 quarts of 10W30, you gotta let the sealant cure for about 24 hours. At minimum, it recommends 2 hours. Anyways, if you lost your 10mm, feel free to subscribe.